Hello, ladies and gentlemen. How are you doing today? I have received word from my marketing team that we've got a lot of registrations for this particular event, and they were asking me for the reason. And I told them very simply, it's because David is the main attendee, and he is extremely popular and well known. So thanks for being part of this podcast, David. Great to have you.
Thank you for inviting me, Kevin.
Yep. So we have attendees from across the globe, and I'm confident that today they'll be able to take home a lot of nuggets of wisdom from your experience and everything you've done to the procurement and supply chain community. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. It's a pleasure to have you, and thank you so much, David.
My
A little bit
pleasure.
about David. David himself carries with him 31 plus years of experience across procurement, supply chain, and technology. It's a very unique blend of experience that sits right between what enterprises look for today. And he's been running Minier Technologies. He's co founded and he's been running Minier Technologies for over 31 years, and that makes Minier Technologies older than me. So I'm sure that the audience has a lot to gain from David's experience. Interestingly, David has also dabbled in teaching for about 5 years. Am I correct, David?
Very much so. Thank you. Yeah.
Correct. So we've been brainstorming over this event and the event flow over several weeks. And David has mentioned that he wants to keep this conversational. He'd want audiences to interact and to have a very fruitful session. So over to you, David. You can do a very quick round of introduction, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. Good day, morning, evening, night, whatever, to everybody. I'm glad that you're here. Thank you, Kevin Verdantis, for inviting me. I think Kevin described my background very clearly, so I don't repeat himself. Uh, this is not just a discussion between Kevin and myself, but I want you to be part of the discussion. So if you have questions, please send them to Kevin, and we will try to answer them either in this podcast, or if not, we will send you the answers by email later. But we will answer all questions. And the main issue which I would like to address today is what I call the data blindness in the age of AI, and how to overcome this in procurement and supply chain, not just in general. And I'm sure you heard about data and AI many times. So I want to start with something or some issues which probably some of you haven't heard. I want to start with the beer game and the bullwhip effect, with the invisible gorilla, and with the murder of Roger Ackroyd, because these all three very different stories are examples of data blindness, and I will describe it more fully. The bullwhip effect, which is part of it is shown in the beer game, is a effect that when you're going upstream in the supply chain from retailer to wholesaler, wholesaler to distributor, distributor to plant, you go upstream, the deviation in the demand increase. For example, if in the retailer level, the deviation between ordering of, let's say, diapers is 2 diapers per week, at the manufacturing level, it's 200 diapers per week. There are reasons for this, which we'll not discuss because this is for another podcast, but this is demonstrated very well in the beer game supply chain simulator. It was created by MIT professor in the 60s. It's still very relevant today, 60 years later, in which there is a beer ordering game from retailer who order from all the level of supply chain. The customers, the instructor change the demand, and chaos is created. There is sometimes much overstock and sometimes much understock, and you cannot fulfill the demand. And the reason for this is data blindness. No one see the whole picture. No one understand what the increase of demand is. Is it a real increase of demand or just increase for shortages? Again, we can speak about this for hours, but just to understand what is an example of data blindness. The invisible gorilla is a very well-known psychological experiment made, I think, 20 or 30 years ago by two American psychologists. And you can find it in YouTube. It's really fascinating. There is a group of basketball players. The participants in the experiment were asked to count how many passes some basketball players do. And in the middle of the experiment, a big gorilla or a person, human being dressed as a gorilla, enter the room and leave. And later, 50% of the participants didn't see the gorilla. It was in front of our eyes, but they didn't see it. We don't remember the gorillas. There are reasons for this, of course, and you can search Google the invisible gorilla and the reason, but the gorilla was in front of the participant and 50% didn't see it. This is a clear example of data blindness. And the third and last example, I like to read the detective books. One of the best and well-known detective books is called The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie. And in this, and I warn you, there is a spoiler. So if you want to read the book independently, put me on mute for 30 seconds.
I'm going to do that.
Yeah. It's a very good book, but the example is too fascinating, so I tell it. The story is told by first person by the village physician, who is alongside the famous detective Hercule Poirot, is trying to solve the mystery. And in the last chapter, Poirot turned to the physician and say, "You are the murderer." And what the physician wrote and told in his story was the truth, but not the whole truth. He told what he did, but not all of what he did, including the murder of this poor Roger Ackroyd. Again, so data is not always what it seems. It's much more complex. I call this MODAF, more data faster. We have much more amount of data because of AI, not only of AI. It moves much faster because of AI, not only because of AI, but do we understand the data more? Not necessarily. And we have a lot of problems that are hindering our efforts to understand the data. One of them is that we don't see all the data, just a small portion of it. And sometimes we don't see it at the right time. We want to understand supplier risk, for example, but we have information data from 3 months old, a year old. What happened in these 3 months? A lot can happen. We don't, and various parts in the organization see various parts of data. I don't know if, and give an example that happened to me some years ago, but can happen today. If you are, let's say, producing a mechanical part, and this mechanical part, let's say, in a medical device, has changes and versions, and you are now working on version number 9, and your supplier is working on version number 8, and your sub-supplier, second tier supplier, is working on version number 7, this is not nice, and this can happen even today. This is what I call orchestration, which data each part is seeing when. And what I described till now is universal really to all parts of the organizations. But in procurement and supply chain, as we all know, this data blindness is much more acute because we have many streams of external data from suppliers and from second tier or third tier suppliers. And maybe we don't have these data streams, but we need the data. For example, what is the situation with the second tier supplier? How much did he produce? Because if the second tier supplier has problems, there are problems of the first tier, but also other problems. Just 2 days ago, I visited a customer, and he told me one of his biggest problem is to understand how much he will buy in the coming years from second tier suppliers, because he works in almost full turnkey production of it's very complex machines. He knows how many machines he will produce or forecasted to produce. He know which models the submonters will buy, but to calculate the spend from second tier supplier is difficult, so he doesn't do it. He has the data, he doesn't have the information. This is data blindness. So everything runs faster because of AI, not just AI, but we don't have it correctly. And AI is both amplifies the problem and one can be one of the remedies, not the only remedy, one of the remedies. Why does it magnify the problems? I want you to understand, because before the AI, there was a period, maybe you don't remember, but we didn't have AI, there were humans in the loop. And humans, with all other faults, did either systematically, formally, or informally, the QA'd the data. They can say there are some irregularities in the data that need review. Because if you understand your data, you work with it for a lot of years, you can look at it, you can see that there are some problems. That sometimes even AI cannot do. And in AI, there is a saying, not mine, from people who know AI much better than me. They call it the jaded frontier of AI. Some things AI can do much, much better than us humans. Some things it can do much, much worse. The frontier is also advancing, but there are still things we can do much better than AI. And some, let's say, natural understanding, grasp of the data, with just looking at it, is still in other domain. So when you take human out of the loop, you lose this QA function, this informal or formal QA function, and you start just dealing the data in many cases without control and checks. The AI will work on it and result and produce garbage. So critical question in other cases where to put the human, where to put the human in the loop, in procurement, in the data assessment. And this is not an easy question because if we want with AI to transform the human into something more strategic, not tactical buyers, but strategic buyers, how do we keep this? And the answer varies from organization to organizations, which when I'm discussing this, but there are answers for this, how to do it. And also you need to understand that because of the data move faster, and when I say data, not only our internal data, it's also our suppliers' data and our second tier, third tier, and so on supplier data. We need to make sure that our suppliers treats and QA and control the data, because if the data comes to us unchecked, it will, in this or that way, create chaos in other world. So part in the, if now data is king, it's our suppliers give us not just physical products or services, they also give us intentionally or unintentionally data, and we must make sure formally, informally, and check it and enforce it, that the suppliers give us high quality data. And changes in suppliers, some key person leaves, doesn't corrupt the quality of the data. So ensuring the quality of post-AI data by putting humans in the loop in the right positions is key. There are others like data audits, and they are really benchmark for data, how much of the data feed is correct, how much is updated, and so on. But this is like a introduction, and now I want to hear you, Kevin, the audience. Please have your questions.
So, David, you touched upon the problem, and you also touched upon some of the remedies, right? Including AI, human in the loop. Uh, how do you think the procurement professionals and the supply chain experts who are viewing this right now, what are the leading indicators that they can rely on? How can they diagnose this issue, that oh, I have a bullwhip effect right now in my supply chain? Are there some leading indicators that they can look at? What would those be?
Yeah, I think that there are some uh, benchmark of data quality, like how much, let's say you have, and I'll give you just an example. Again, that data KPIs can be another podcast. Maybe in a few months we can do it.
Yeah.
But if you, let's say you have 100 suppliers, and for each suppliers, you have 10 records of data, overall 1,000 records. You can check first how much of them are filled. Let's say you have 800 records, meaning you are missing 200 records, and
Right.
you need to keep it. Second, of the 800 records, check by some sample how much of them is correct. Maybe the address is not correct. Maybe the key person is not correct. And if, think of it like a physical warehouse. In a physical warehouse, today you're not just doing inventory count at the end of the financial year to make sure that you have the right inventory according to the computer. You're also doing a sample inventory check to see that the inventory is correct and to understand if there are problems which you will not see if you do it one big inventory check at the end of the year. You're doing, let's say, 10, 20 items every week. So like this, do a periodic take, you have 800 records in my example, check 10 items per week. And if consistently you have bad numbers, that part of the data, large part, is not accurate, this means that there are problems in the data, not and probably also in the process of the data. Because procurement, as I say, data you can view it data is data is like part of what the supplier give us. And I spoke about supplier data. This is an example. And maybe if we see that our own data, the forecasted data is not correct, let's try to improve the forecast process, for example, to make it better. Sanya asked, what is the most common false fix? What do you mean false fix? You mean fixing for the bullwhip, if I understand correctly?
I think they mean what's an incorrect fix that the companies employ without understanding the problem uh,
Okay,
for solving the bullwhip effect.
okay. I answered Sanya first and then you, Antonio. Thank you for the questions. I'm glad with this discussion.
Yeah.
There was a famous Israeli humorist to say, what is a monologue and a dialogue? A monologue, one person speak to himself. A dialogue, two persons speak to themselves. So I'm glad I'm speaking. It's a real dialogue, multilogue. Okay, the most common uh, uh, methods companies do is to increase the inventory because, again, I can show if in the bullwhip effect in the beer game, you start with a demand of 4 items per week. When you increase it to 8 items per week, and it stays 8 for all subsequent weeks. But you reach, because of the bullwhip effect, which amplifies the problem, you reach shortages of 500 units and stock of 500 units. Because this is what the most common wrong methods. Instead of understanding the data, what is the cause of the demand? Is it real demand of the end consumer who ordered the beer to start with? Or is it just amplification demand? Companies or the retailer, or especially the wholesaler, distributor plant, increase their safety stock and create and amplify the bullwhip effect. So this is the most common wrong solutions for the bullwhip.
It compounds the problem even more.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Exactly.
okay.
And it takes several cycles that the participants uh, will understand what happens. But sometimes keen observers can understand what happened. And I give an example. And when I move to the other questions, I
Yes.
don't want Antonio to be angry at me. It was 20 years ago that Motorola was then a major player in the mobile phone market. Uh, uh, said in physical report of record sales for Q4, which is the most hectic time for consumer electronics and other things. What was the reaction of the market? The and I can speak again for I cut it because I have more questions, but the stock, the share price plummet because investor understood that Motorola didn't sell to the end consumer, Kevin, David, Sunny, Antonio, they sold it to the distributors. So now distributors have a lot of inventory, and in the next quarters, we will not buy from Motorola. And I can have many more examples like this of what is the meaning of data. Okay, let's move to Antonio. How can I assess that these phenomena exist in my organization? How to diagnose them? When you say these phenomena, do you mean the bullwhip or the data blindness? If you can
I think
write.
David, I think David, you answered this question. Antonio has another question, which is, what should an ideal source of truth look like across functions?
Okay.
Uh,
This is an excellent question. Uh, just in a procurement project of building a large warehouse logistics center, I created this single source of truth for the for the organization. It should include all relevant data, and relevant data change from function to function. What procurement want isn't necessarily what finance want. So you should, because maybe one of the most important sentence I will speak now is that the procurement process, and we all know it, doesn't start and doesn't end at the procurement function. So the single sort of truth shouldn't be for the procurement function. It should be for the all relevant stakeholders in the organization. The user who require, whether it's a direct procurement or indirect procurement, finance, maybe legal, and the data should be, first of all, of course, let's call it the structured data. How many items did we bought from him next year, money-wise, quantity-wise, and also unstructured data in contract, which is a Word document, or assessment of the supplier by a quality assurance guy who visited him. So based on the organization and the use, where it is a regular production item and indirect, for every category, there is its own ideal single source of truth, how it should look like. If it's a project, it's also very different, because in project you have a lot of external parties, planners and so on, consultant, which they are part of the process. How do you justify investment in coordination plus truth system when ROI is hard to attribute? Excellent question, Sanya, thank you. I think that you have to create scenarios. This is not, this is not a one time that you can say I invest in a machine which will produce 50 times an hour and will create this revenue, that revenue. But you should create scenarios of what is the situation without this truth system, and because if to translate your question or to put it in a different way, you ask is what is the cost of wrong data? This is another name for uh, another way I can phrase your question. And again, this is again we can put in some months what is the cost of bad data, and it can be very trivial. You send or a PO to the wrong guy and you lose some days, or it can be very critical because you are still working with supplier who financial risk you haven't updated, and now you have a supplier who and you are greatly at risk. So you are creating scenarios. What can be the implications of working with partial truth, what I call data blindness, and what are the remedies? And sometimes you can achieve a lot, and with low-hanging fruits. I didn't speak about uh, implementing data system, IT, etc. We can also do this, but I always recommend starting small with processes, then adding technology. You can achieve a lot by good processes and creating like a community which have the same data at the same time. Part of the bull of what create the Bullwhip effect is that different people or function, retailer, wholesaler, distributor, plant, see different data at different times.
So for any leader in supply chain or procurement who knows that they have a bullwhip effect, uh, step one to convince management is the cost of bad data, like play out scenarios that are
Yeah,
extremely damaging
yeah,
to sort of get buy-in. And step two is before investing in expensive software, start small,
yeah,
mend processes
yeah,
that also refines your own understanding before you make a larger investment.
yeah.
That's great. David, I had one more question. Do you think once these phenomenon are identified, do you think there is one specific team that should be in charge, especially at enterprise companies, and they should have fixed KPIs to solve this issue, or do you think it should be a headache of your procurement leaders, your supply chain teams?
I think it should be the procurement of supply chain team. Uh, I strongly think so. Because again, one of the goals of the roles of the supply chain procurement teams is to lead the procurement process. And the procurement process include many other stakeholders, depending
Right.
on the category. If it's direct category, it's relatively small numbers of internal users in production. But if it's the indirect categories, then you have many internal users who have an opinion.
Yeah.
If it's business travel, cars, laptops, computers, you have many, and it's the procurement team's role is to be a leader, not just a leader of the procurement team, but a leader of the whole procurement community who is much bigger than the procurement team. The procurement team can be 20 people, but the procurement community can be hundreds of user, internal stakeholders, and so on. And the procurement leader should be also the leader of this procurement community and be their guidance how to do procurement good. Because in sometimes, and I hope I'm not stealing too much of the time, there
Absolutely. Go
is
ahead.
there is a disinclinations. You have to align the goals of the internal users with the goals of the organizations. And you have to have the right data for this to enforce policy, for example, in cars, laptops, business travel. And the procurement should be the leader for this. And it's not easy. And you need to have the right data for this, because, for example, if you are in a global company,
Mhm.
and specifically I'm saying taking business travel, which is a very complex category, it's hard to calculate savings, so on, and you have outlet physical branches in other countries. You need to have the right amount of data and fast to make sure that people outside the headquarters are complying with the policy. So when I say leader, it's leader not just of the team of procurement, but of the whole community, and aligning between the procurement community of internal user to the organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. It's a fantastic answer. I know we're way over time. We really should make these sessions a little longer, so that our to our audiences benefit. But thanks a lot, David. Thanks a lot for this time. I am
Thank
sure
you.
we will need to schedule some follow-up sessions in the coming months,
My
so
pleasure.
our viewers can continue to gain this value. Thanks a lot for everyone who's joined in. Uh, and a recording of this session will be live on our LinkedIn page where you can find it.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks a
you
lot,
all.
David.
Kevin, bye.